Hi, everyone. Joseph Feng here. I am the Director of Investor Relations with Break of Day Capital. We are a real estate firm specializing in large multifamily in the Southwest with over $320 million in acquisitions to date. Our mission is to provide our investors with strong risk-adjusted returns while providing our communities with a great place to live. Joining us today is our syndication attorney and friend, Mauricio Rauld, who is known as one of the few lawyers that actually speaks in easy to understand, plain English, although we cannot say the same about his handwriting. Before we continue, and to prove to Mauricio that we actually pay attention in class, nothing we say here today should be considered as legal, financial, or even lifestyle advice. Mauricio is not your attorney, but he's here to provide valuable education and perhaps a little entertainment as well. Before I turn the presentation over to Mauricio, where he will be speaking on the Private Placement Memorandum today, PPM, let me give you a little bit about his background. Mauricio is the founder of Platinum Legal Consulting, where he coaches and consults with top syndicators in structuring deals and staying compliant with the law. He likes to say that he keeps people like us out of jail. Mauricio is also the founder of Premier Law Group, which he left in 2024, having been with the firm for almost 2 decades and built the firm to be one of the top and most respected syndication law firms in the country. Named as Rising Star by Super Lawyers magazine, you can often see Mauricio share the stage with the likes of the real estate guys, Robert Kiyosaki, Ken McElroy, Brandon Turner, Pace Morby, Brad Sumrock, and others. He's also a recurrent guest on many of their podcasts as well. Mauricio co-hosts the Drunk Real Estate podcast with Jay Scott, Kyle Wilson, and AJ Osborne, and is the host of his own podcast, the Real Estate Syndicator Live Show. Basically, Mauricio is a trusted expert in the industry, and he really knows his stuff. So without further ado, the stage is yours, Mauricio.
Well, thanks, Joseph. Really appreciate those kind words. Yeah, I decided to stop the second one. I had a podcast. I think this week was the last one that went out, Real Estate Syndicate Live, where I really wanted to bring in guests and kind of not just talk about the law, because honestly, I was just getting tired of talking about the same stuff over and over. I mean, and I've now realized that it's actually super valuable because I always assume that when people hear me, like for some reason, I think every post that I go out, it gets viewed by millions of people and everybody doesn't want to hear it again. And I realize, no, I've been talking about some things for decades and people still don't hear about it. So I've decided to let that podcast go. But yeah, Drunk Real Estate is just a lot of fun. And it's just me and three buddies basically chit-chatting over a glass of wine and talking real estate. So that's fun. And yeah, Joe, thanks for having me. I know you're part of my new venture. I left Premier Law Group. I actually exited Premier. My amazing partner Bethany was already pretty much running the show over there. I was just kind of hanging around, and I think they got tired of me hanging around, and so they said, "Hey, why don't you go do what you really want to do, which is go teach and mentor and coach?" And that's why I started my Elite Syndicator program to really address this gap. And I know we're going to talk a lot about compliance today, but there's such a huge compliance gap from the time you think about wanting to raise capital. So maybe you're on this call and you're like, yeah, it either sounds like a great idea. I'm looking into it. I'm already, gun ho, or maybe you've done a couple deals. But between that time and the time you actually hire somebody like myself, like a securities attorney to do your PPM and do all your stuff, there's a gap because you usually don't hire that attorney until you're under contract, usually, right? Once you get into an LOI accepted and a contract, then maybe that's when you start, looking for an attorney. Then in between all that time, there's just this huge gap where people are just stepping on landmines left and right and not knowing anything about compliance, or, the biggest fear that I keep getting told is, I just don't know what I don't know. And so I really designed this program to fill that gap so that people have access to me every week and can just ask questions and implement what they've heard, or even from my stuff. There's so much information out there that implementing stuff and being able to ask your specific questions. Is this post on social media okay? Can I pitch my deal at this event? Can I do this? Can I do that? And that's really what I've been doing for the last, really since December. I didn't take any time off, Joe. I should have taken at least, I don't know, a couple weeks off or something, but I just went straight into I didn't even have the program, and I just went out there to the marketplace. But for those of you who don't know, I'm sorry, that was a kind of a long-winded thing. I am a securities attorney. Do not hold that against me. I'm actually a pretty fun lawyer. My buddy Tom Wheelwright, one of the Rich Dad advisors, likes to say I'm one of the few attorneys that actually speaks English. So I'm pretty good. I've just accepted it. I'm not somebody that likes to brag a lot, and so I was always hesitant to sort of acknowledge that I have this knack of taking these complicated, esoteric securities mumbo jumbo and just making them easy to understand. And that's what I'm going to do today. I think we're talking about PPMs and you know kind of what to look for in a PPM. So we'll get to that in a second. I've been doing this, as you can tell from my gray hair, for a while. I've been doing this now for 20. This is my 26th year of practicing. I started back in 1999. In fact, my wife Heidi and I were just looking at some old photos, or maybe I was looking for some photos for something. And yeah, when I first met my wife, which was only about 10, 11 years ago, I didn't have as much white hair. I don't know if it's the kids or the lifestyle. I'm not sure what's going on, but been doing this for 25 years. Started my career at a law firm, an amazing law firm here in Southern California, where I did litigation, securities litigation. So I would represent these big securities firms, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, American Express, Goldman Sachs, all those guys. But it's when they got sued. When they got sued, we would get hired and I would represent them in trials and depositions and motions and appellate work and arbitrations and all that fun stuff. So I'm used to seeing stuff from the other side when the you know what already hits the fan. I left Premier Law Group. That's a long, long story, but I left the firm to go work for the real estate guys as their general counsel, and that's really where I cut my teeth in syndications, and I did all of their syndications. I was their general counsel, and then I just decided to create my own firm in '06, Premier Law Group. Basically, kind of kept the real estate guys as a client, but that's really where I focused on syndication and asset protection. By the way, there's a book over here called Legal Strategies for Everyone, which I wrote for Ken McElroy's company. And that's really an asset protection thing. But for the last 8 years, that's since my daughter's turning 9. So maybe the last 9 years, I've just been all in on syndication. That's all I've been doing, really specializing as a real estate syndicator. And, you know, like Joe said, I built Premier Law Group to a multi 7-figure company and really represent some of the top syndicators on the planet, including Joe. And I decided to sell that. So I exited in November of last year, started my coaching program, and just love educating. I just, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day, just seeing light bulbs light up, you know, when I'm explaining things to people, and it's just things they've probably heard over and over again by other lawyers, and then I'm able to communicate that. So hopefully I can translate that a little bit to this. I'll do a little bit of a little spiel here. Kind of, we want to outline some of the top things to look for in a PPM. And then what I'd really love to do is, because really where I excel is it's no accident that I designed the program that I have as a Q&A, primarily a Q&A program. Like I do a little bit of a presentation, but ultimately it's a chance for my elite syndicator students to ask questions that are relevant to them. So I want to make sure we're bringing value to you guys. And so I can sit here and talk about all this stuff, but I really would love to hear what your specific concern are, especially about the PPM. If there's an area that you're not clear on, or if there's something that you typically see in a PPM or something like that we don't talk, please ask about it. But yeah, the PPM is a long document. Let's just take it back for a little bit. So a PPM, it's a private placement memorandum, and it is primarily a disclosure document. It's a document that is supposed to disclose all of the risks of a particular deal, as well as all of the, what I call skeletons in your closet, right? A sponsor's background and history. Certainly if there's anything that's sketchy in their background, it needs to be disclosed. I analogize it to a medical consent form. I don't know how many of you guys have had surgery in the past. I tend to have I've had a lot of surgeries, but even like just oral surgery, like just my teeth are a mess. And so I'll go in to get, I don't know, some tooth pulled or whatever, but they've got to put me under because it's tough to do. And they'll give me that yellow medical consent form, right? You guys are all familiar with it. That'll tell you all of the risks of the procedure. For my teeth, it's usually I could have some bleeding, I could have an infection, I could die from this procedure. I mean, there's all these awful things, and you kind of say, I get it, understand. You sign off, the doctor signed off, and then boom, the doctor performs the procedure. That's what a PPM is. It's just a way of all the ways your deal can go south, whether they're realistic or not. It's a scary document, especially if you've never invested in a syndication and it's your first time looking at something. You're just basically going to tell you, this is all the ways this deal is going to go south or potentially go south. You're going to lose all your money. There's no way for you to get out of this deal. You know, there's no market for it. Like, you know, all the bad stuff, really. And the purpose of it is really to just make sure that you as a passive investor, as an LP, go into it with eyes wide open. You know all the risks, you know all the information. You can then make an intelligent decision whether this investment is suitable for you and fits your goals. but the idea of this document is to make sure that it's all disclosed. And so PPMs, I want to make one clarifying question, because when people say a PPM, there's a PPM and then there's like offering documents, right? And so it's just vernacular, but a PPM for me also may include several other documents or several other exhibits. So there's PPM, the Private Placement Memorandum, which is a disclosure document. In my world, those are usually something like a 50 to 60 page, just full of nasty disclosure documents and things like that. Then there's the operating agreement, which in my world is an exhibit to the PPM, but it's part of the PPM or part of these offering documents. It's an operating agreement that lists all of the procedures of the entity that you're investing in. So usually we use limited liability companies. And so we have an operating agreement. Really should be called an operating disagreement, because it's really a document that you look at if there's some confusion or disagreement, right? People often ask me and say, hey, Mauricio, I need to do this, or can I do this? Can I do that? You know, I want to do a cash call, or I want to do a vote, or I want to do this. Can I do it? And I say, well, we got to look at the operating agreement. That's where it's going to be outlined, all the procedures. If I'm going to call a vote, you know, how does that work? Who do I have to give notice to? How many days? Like, it's all laid out in the operating agreement. So that's kind of part of the PPM. Then we have something called a subscription agreement, which is actually the legal document that binds the investor to the investment. And so that's pretty simple document. It basically just says, hey, I'm committing $50,000 or $100,000 in exchange for 2% of the company. Here's my information. Here's my social security number, EIN, whatever. And then you sign that. That's actually the legal document that binds you. So anything that has to do with timing regarding filings or whatever is based on the date of that document, because that's the contract that says, hey, I'm going to give you money. And you say, hey, I'm going to give you shares in the company or membership units. Boom, subscription agreement. Then the next document is an investor questionnaire, because we need to keep track of who's in the deal, especially if it's a 506B offering where we have to track the non-accredited. But even if they're all accredited, there's some questionnaire just to say how many of those guys, what's their level of sophistication, are they accredited, what's their net worth, what's their information. That's all in something called an investor questionnaire. And the last document, which usually is reversed, usually it's the first document that goes out, but it's the last document in the offering docs, is the business plan, right? The pitch deck, a lot of different names for it, executive summary. And that's really more of a marketing tool that says, hey, this is what we're doing with this deal. Hey, we're going to buy this property. Here's some pretty pictures of the property. It's in this marketplace. Here's the game plan. We're going to renovate it, increase the rents, increase the income, refinance, sell, like whatever the plan is for your dollars, that's all going to be in a business plan. But it can get a little messy. And if you've never seen one, there's the 80-20 rule, right? There's like there's a lot of stuff in the PPM, but probably, 20% of it is probably responsible for 80% of what you really want to pay attention to. And so I usually talk about maybe 5 or 6 sections of the PPM that I would really pay. I probably should have had a little bit of a sample document or something here, but they all have these sections. So this is not something that you have to, like, I want to do it. And they're all pretty much called the same thing. So the first thing I would look at, obviously, is other risk factors. I mean, this is primarily a disclosure document. So you want to know what all the risks are in this particular investment. And every investment is different. You're going to have some risks that are generic, right? I mean, if you're investing in multifamily and real estate, then you have all the traditional risks associated with real estate and interest rates and, the marketplace and all that stuff. But then there's what I'd really be paying attention to is the specific risk to this particular property, right? And this particular loan product. I think a lot of people overlook the risk to the loan product. Maybe not so much now because there was so much issues over the last few years with the loan products. But information about the type of loan that you have would be in the risk factor section. So is this well, it's not going to be a 30-year loan because they don't have those in commercial, but it's usually is it a 10-year loan? Is it a 15? Is it a 7? What I'd be looking very closely at, is it a bridge loan? That's what we started to see a lot back in 2021, 2022. And I remember, again, I'm just there I'm the messenger, right? My job is to take the information from my client and make sure I disclose it. But usually bridge loans, for example, were really used many, many years, maybe decades ago, just literally to bridge the gap. It's like, hey, I just need a couple more. Maybe I'm doing a heavy value add and I need this little piece of time to just get through the value add. It'll get reevaluated and then we can come in with some permanent financing. But I saw almost all the deals in 2021, 2022 had a bridge loans where there were really short-term loans at sort of a 3-year loan. And then you had to refinance or sell after 3 years. There were technically a 3+1+1. So people thought it was 5 years, but it's really 3-year loans. And of course, with everything that's happened, nobody's fault really. It's just interest rates have just skyrocketed they went from basically 0 to 5, and I don't know what we got up to, 5.75, 5.5 on the federal funds rate. And so mortgage rates just went from, 2 or 3% all the way to sometimes 9, and some people are having 9. And so when those reset, after the 3 years, or if you bought insurance and it passed the cap, that caused a lot of issues. So that's something I would definitely pay attention to, is what's the loan product, and that's going to be found in the risk factors. And same thing with the market. To me, the market's almost more important than the property itself, to be honest with you. I've got my way of going through my things, and I put market ahead of the property. Like, you could have a really crappy property, but it happens to be in a growing area market, it's going to bail you out. And the opposite is true too. You can have the most amazing property out there, but if it just happens to be in a state where everybody's getting out of Dodge and leaving and the market's collapsing, there's not much you can, there's not much you can do, especially if you're forced to sell. So all of the risks about a particular market, or maybe not risk, but clarifications, because on the business plan, everybody talks about, oh, there's all these people coming to the market. Here's the job growth. Here's this is why we love the market. But pay attention to what other factors are in the marketplace. So I think risk factors is where I would go with them first. Then I think the thing that most investors are most interested in, right or wrong, is sort of the waterfall structure, right? Like, how are the profits of the deal going to be split between the sponsors and the investors? And that's going to be in a waterfall section. Now, in our documents, we really do our best to really make it super easy and super simple to understand. Literally, step 1, step 2, step 3. If you look at our documents, you'll see a very clear pecking order of who gets paid when and what. But just make sure that whatever they've been telling you on the webinars or whatever they've been telling you on the business plan is actually really in the PPM, but also in the operating agreement. We'll talk about a little bit later on, but like some of the pitfalls that you have are just making sure that the PPM and the operating agreement match. Sometimes they just don't match. And the operating agreement is really the governing body. So if they're telling you there's a 7% pref, and it's not in the operating agreement, there's no 7% pref, right? So you want to pay attention to those things. But the waterfall will dictate, is this, a typical waterfall, when I say waterfall, is how you distribute the cash. A typical waterfall probably would be something like an 80-20 split, right? Where investors put all the money in, and the operator will do its thing. It'll get the rents every month, and then every quarter there'll be a specific amount of money left over to distribute. And they'll say 80% of the money available to distribute is going to go to the investors, and then 20% will go to the sponsors for doing all the work. And that would be sort of an 80-20 split. On top of that, a lot of people probably, I don't know, I'm kind of guesstimating, but I would say 60 to 70% of the sponsors I work with will have a preferred return as well in there. Preferred returns are very important. They're not guarantees. I want to be very, very clear on that. When you see the word preferred return, do not assume guarantee. But let's say a typical preferred return might be 7 or 8%. Let's just pick 8% for an example. All that means is that 100% of what's available to distribute is going to go to the investors until they hit that 8% return. Once they hit that 8% return, then we go into the 80-20 split after that, if that's the arrangement. So it's not a guarantee, because if there's not enough money to get you 8%, you ain't getting 8%, right? If there's just enough money to get you 5%, then your return that quarter is going to be, or that year is going to be 5%. It just means that the sponsor didn't get anything, because all of the money went to you up until your 5%, but it doesn't mean you're going to get the 8, right? And so you want to pay attention when you're looking at preferreds, like what happens if there's a deficiency, right? If they're promising you 8% and they only give you 5 in the first year, not because they want to, but that they gave it all to you, but that only made up 5%, there's going to be a gap of 3%, for example. So what happens to that? Are they going to roll it over to the following year, which is usually what they do? So next year, they owe you another 8% preferred plus the 3% that they're short the first year. And that can keep rolling on for a while until the property actually sells. And so if something doesn't cash flow very much, you could be behind the preferred the entire way, and you don't actually get caught up until there's a refinance or a sale. But how that preferred return shortage is handled is something that's going to be in the PPM. You want to pay a lot of attention to that. So that's kind of the waterfall piece that I think is important. And then you also want to pay attention of how the back end is split, because what we just described is what are we doing with the cash flow from operations. So this is if it's assuming it's a property, it's generating income through rents, and there's expenses, and then there's available cash, and that just gets distributed usually quarterly, although sometimes people do it monthly, but let's just say quarterly. Great. So that just happens for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then at some point at sale, what is the waterfall at sale? And here's how the waterfall should be. and that's definitely how the documents are done when we're working with Joe, is first of all, well, this assuming you've paid everybody, your loan, you got a mortgage to pay, you got to pay all the costs for closing. But once that is done, 100% of what's left over first should be going to the investors. 100% goes to the investors until they are made whole, until they've received all of their money back that they invested. So if they invested 100 grand, let's make sure they get that 100 grand back first before we do any other splits, right? So 100% of the money first goes back to the investors until their capital contribution is basically zeroed out. Great. Then the next level should be, again, if there's a preferred return and we're still missing preferred returns, we want to make sure all the money goes back to the investors until that preferred return is finally caught up. And then whatever's left over is going to get split, some percentage to the sponsor and some percentage to the investors. Don't assume that the percentage that was done on the cash flow is the same percentage on the back end. That does not have to match. And a lot of times there might be an additional waterfall on the back end where maybe the investors might get 80% of the profits until they hit a certain hurdle, maybe 16%, 15, 16, 7% return. And then after that, it's 50-50. So you've got to really pay attention to what the waterfall is, how the cash flow is distributing. So I think waterfalls to me is a big section of the PPM that I would pay a lot of attention to. The other section that's important, although don't get your hopes up, is the voting section, right? Like, what are your rights as an investor in order to make decisions in the deal? Now, these are syndications. You are, by definition, a limited partner, which means two things. One, you're limited, technically not because you're limited in voting, it's because you're limited in liability, right? You've invested $50,000 or $100,000. In theory, that's the most you can lose if the deal completely collapses. Your maximum exposure is that money that you invested. Like, the bank's not going to come after you if there's a deficiency. If there's a big lawsuit that happens relating to the property, you're not going to be touched with that. But in exchange for that, you also get very limited voting rights. And in most syndications, to be honest with you, a lot of syndications, I would say the majority of them, you have like zero rights, like no voting rights. Now, I think that's a little extreme. I may even argue that it's not even allowed, because there's certain things that you're at a bare minimum, and you'll see those in our docs, a bare minimum. For example, obviously, if you're thinking the manager's up to no good and the manager's stealing from you or commingling, you want to have some mechanism for you to potentially vote the manager off if they're doing something disastrous, right? Not that they're just not doing their job, but really if they're commingling funds or committing fraud or whatever, you want to have a mechanism, obviously, for the investor to be able to go in and do a vote. But even like the preferred allocations, like, you can't. I would think that the investors would want to have a vote, and that's how we draft it, where if you've told the investors, hey, this is going to be an 8% preferred and then an 80-20 split after that, then you can't just come in and say, well, I think I'm going to take away the preferred return, or I'm going to reduce the preferred return to 5% and then split it to 50-50. I mean, you start messing with the allocations. Again, I would think that the investors would have a say, and the way our documents are drafted is if you make a change relating to the preferred allocation, you need a majority vote of both the LPs and the GPs. Again, just a kind of a protection for investors. But that's what you want to pay attention to, is under what circumstances do you actually get a vote? And if you do get a vote, is it a majority? Is it a supermajority? Is it a unanimous? Like, what does that look like? That's something I would also pay attention to. The other part that every PPM will have, usually as part of the business plan, that's why I say the business plan is kind of part of the PPM, but there's going to be a pro forma, and you want to pay a lot of attention to the pro forma of the deal, because that's what's going to show you. I mean, let's be honest, it's kind of the best guess or an educated guess of what the sponsor thinks the future holds. But that's something you want to pay close attention to, because there's a ton of assumptions that the sponsor has made to put those performers together. And a good PPM will tell you what those assumptions are and tell you, hey, nothing guaranteed here, folks. I mean, we're assuming an X% increase in rents every year. There's no assurances that will happen. So our documents are peppered, again, with those disclosures. But you want to try and figure out what are the assumptions that the sponsor has made, because that pro forma is there's 1,000 assumptions that the sponsor made. You want to understand what those assumptions are, and then you just want to ask yourself, do you agree with those assumptions? Do you think those are reasonable? And even if you don't agree with them, you can sort of self-adjust some of them. I'll give you a couple of examples. The easiest one is the rent increases, right? So what is the sponsor assuming rents are going to increase every year, especially after the property's been stabilized? Are they assuming a 2% rent growth, a 5% rent growth, a 10% rent growth? I mean, if I see something like a 10% rent growth after stabilization, I'm going to be like, there's just what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean 10% rent increase? That's, I don't know. I don't think that's possible. But that doesn't mean the deal's not a good deal. It just means I would go in there and say, okay, well, I think rent growth is really 2%. So you can actually rerun the numbers with your assumption of 2% and then see if you still like the deal or not. Same thing with expenses. There's going to be some assumption of how quickly or how high the expenses are going to go. And you want to look at that and see whether that's reasonable or not. You want to just make sure they've captured all the information in there. Now, I, as a syndication attorney, will usually spend a lot of time on the pro forma just to make sure it adds up, because you'll be surprised, especially with first-time syndicators, their pro formas sometimes just don't even add up, right? Or don't make any sense. Now Joe and Gary have been doing this for a long, long time, so that's a little bit different. But pay attention to the pro forma, because that'll dictate kind of, what the projected returns are going to be. Even though you have a preferred return, are you going to even get the preferred return the first year? And then if it rolls over, you just want to see the thing. So I would pay a lot of attention to the pro forma. And then also there's another chart, or sort of like an underwriting thing called use of funds. And I also would want to pay attention to the use of funds, which there should be a section there that says, hey, we're going to collect whatever we're going to collect from the investors. Let's say $1 million is the capital raise. Where's that $1 million going? Like, I want to know what are you using this money for? And a big chunk of that is obviously going to be to the down payment for the property, and the fees are going to be there, right? That's why I want to pay attention to use of funds. The fees, the acquisition fee, whatever those fees are going to be listed in that use of funds, and you obviously want to know what kind of fees the sponsor's taking. That's another big thing. That's one of my pet peeves. We're also very clear on our PPMs where the fees are, and I have a section on fees, and it's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've seen a lot of PPMs where the fees are scattered all over the document. There's a fee on page 2, another fee, and you have to kind of put it together. I just think it's neater. I like it to, even on the business plan, be neat, but even if it's not neat on the business plan, we'll have a very neat section in both the PPM and the operating agreement, exactly what fees the sponsors are taking. So pay attention to those use of funds. Find out what fees are taken. Do you think those are reasonable? They're not reasonable. And then where's the money going? Do they have reserves? That's another big one, right? Reserves are going to be part of that use of funds. There should be 2 types of reserves. One is what we call a sort of a, I forget how we describe it. There's 2 types. One is in case something comes up, gets over budget. Like you thought this was going to cost you 10,000, and then it ended up costing you 12,000. You have that little reserve to cover that extra 2,000 that you didn't budget for. And then there's the other one that is like, I just didn't even think of this. Like, I just didn't even think I was going to have this charge. And so you want to have a line item in there that kind of covers in case something came up that the sponsor didn't think of, or maybe there was something that needed to be repaired that originally wasn't part of the deal. So pro formas and use of funds are a big one. Lately, I would say cash calls. Nobody paid attention to the cash call provisions of the PPM until a couple years ago, because everything had been going so well over the last, since 2008, that it never became an issue. Cash calls are becoming an issue. So take a look at the cash call provision. There should be one in there. It's probably not going to be called cash call. It's going to probably be called capital contributions or additional capital contributions. But when people ask me, hey, I need to do a cash call, what do I do, or what's the process? It should be in at least the operating agreement. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And most cash calls, and this is what I would expect to see, should rarely, I've never seen this. Cash calls are usually not mandatory, because investors want to write a check and just know that's the most. They don't want to write a check and then have to maybe write another check tomorrow, next year, or the next year. So most cash calls are technically voluntary, meaning I'm not obligated to put in more money. However, if you do not put money in, you definitely will be diluted. And there's some dilution provision in the cash call section. So you want to just understand what that looks like and what the process is for a cash call. What happens? When can a cash call be made? Is it a vote by the manager? Is it a vote by the members? How is that going to happen? All the stuff about cash calls is going to be in that provision. And finally, people are paying attention to that. The other section that I'd never talked about before, which we definitely want to have, that again, a lot of people are paying attention to because it's becoming an issue with a lot of GPs. It's one of my pet peeves, actually, but it's just reports. Like, what type of reports is the sponsor going to be giving to you as the LP? There's no obligation to give you a report. It's not a legal requirement, but generally speaking, the ordinary customary process is, once a quarter when you distribute a check or whatever, that usually comes accompanied with some form of a financial statement. It's not going to be an audited, super complex, but hey, here's how much money we made this quarter. Here are our expenses. Here's how much is left over. And here's your 80% that goes to you. And that report usually goes with a report. How did the quarter go? Things were going well, things were ahead of schedule, behind schedule, a lot of vacancies, or this is really going great, or whatever that looks like. There should be a report. And so find out how often are they going to be doing the report, when are the reports coming out. And I think a pro tip for LPs in general are just again, before you invest, maybe ask for a sample report so you can get an idea of the types of reporting that they're going to be sending out. Because, as an LP investor myself, sometimes I've invested in deals and I'm expecting a type of level of a report, and I just don't, what I get isn't super helpful to me. It's like, it's just sort of a flimsy little thing, and it doesn't really tell me much. There's really sophisticated ways of doing reports where they compare pro forma versus actual, which is one of the ways I like to do it. Again, nothing that's not required by law, and so you want to see in the PPM what that kind of stuff is. I'm going to stop here for a second because I feel like I've been talking nonstop for a while. Joe, is there anything else any questions that pop up in your mind, or if there's questions that are coming in? I'd like to start maybe addressing some of the concerns or questions that the folks on the call have, so that I don't just babble about random stuff that maybe nobody cares about.
Well,
If you guys have got questions, drop them in. Or Joe, what kind of questions do you typically get from investors?
well, your presentation was so good that the couple that I have pre-submitted kind of answered them already, which were what are some of your top red flags that would just make you walk away from the deal within 5 minutes?
Yeah, let
I
me let
think
me
you
address
covered
those.
some.
I've got a couple of fun stories about that. So, back in my earlier days, it just doesn't make sense anymore. I used to actually review other people's PPM. A client would come to me and said, "I'm thinking about investing in this deal. Can you please review the PPM for me?" Whatever. And so I would do that. And a couple of things I would note. One is, if there is no PPM, so just to start, if there's no PPM, find out whether one's required or not. Generally speaking, if there are non-accredited investors in a particular deal, then a full-blown PPM is required by law, right? And if they start giving you excuses as to why they don't have to do one or whatever, that's where you start thinking, if they're cutting corners in the PPM, where else are they cutting corners, right? And this actually happened one time. I reviewed something. I suggested, hey, there should be a PPM. Uh, in fact, I think the client itself, he was non-accredited, so I knew there was at least one non-accredited, so PPMs were required. I think he ended up investing because I found out 2 or 3 years later that there was some fraud going on, and they lost all their money because of some sketchy stuff. So that's one thing I would pay attention to, or a red flag. Same thing with the business plan. I got a client once that had a deal, and they didn't even get a business plan. Like, there was no PPM, and uh, even the business plan was sort of like I don't know, it was like, I remember it being like some educational generic sample business. It was just a mess. And I was like, hey, I don't, this isn't there. Something's going on here. I don't know why they're giving you this crap. They're clearly not working with an attorney. That's a red flag right there. I can't imagine a world where they're not working with a securities attorney. But and same thing. There, years later, it turned out that this person was taking some loans out against the property, and there was some fraud allegations. And we were trying to figure out, now, do we report it to the SEC, or do we try and just get our money out and stuff like that? So make sure that you should be getting a professional private placement memorandum with a professional business plan. And if you don't get that, be super wary. And then I mentioned it briefly, but another red flag for me is when PPMs and operating agreements don't match, right? If they're that sloppy there, just, that's a red flag for me as well. Like, why is there, or if what they're telling me doesn't match the PPM, that's definitely a red flag. But certainly, if the PPM and the operating agreement don't match, that's at least a question you want to go bring back to your sponsors. But those are kind of the big red flags. And then not getting any reports would be another one. But I think that's already, once it's happened. That's why I think it's so important to get copies of prior reports, so that you can kind of see. And if they don't have any, or they're not willing to share them to you, then it's like, okay, why? Anytime somebody doesn't want to do something, it almost makes it more of a red flag. Like, it shouldn't be a big deal for you to share something with me. The fact that you're not sharing with me becomes a red flag, not necessarily the thing that you're sharing with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. A couple more here. Do you see uh, any changes coming, sort of
Oh,
like in this private equity syndication business? there's this notion that, maybe some argue that the stock market's way overvalued and that you should expect to see lower returns, over the next whatever decade. Goldman Sachs has got like a 3% average annualized, expectation. Um, Perhaps, there might be more money or more interest in private equity or some of these alternative investments. Like, where's your head in that? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's already happening, right? So with the new administration, you have a new incoming SEC commissioner, Securities and Exchange Commission commissioner, who's basically in charge of these regulations and making the rules. And new commissioner's name is Paul Atkins, and he just had his confirmation hearing Thursday of last week. So I don't know exactly when the official confirmation will happen, but by all accounts, he's going to become the new SEC commissioner, and he's very pro building capital and capital raising, right? He's less of a regulator. He likes, he wants to protect folks, but he doesn't want to overdo it. And you've already seen a couple of rules that have come out in the interim about making it easier to verify investors and all that stuff. But I think the biggest changes that'll affect everybody in this room, there's a couple of them. Well, in this room, it's specifically one. There's the other one will affect you, Joe, and Gary, and sponsors, maybe less on the LP side. But the one that's going to absolutely come down the pipeline, I have no doubt about it. I made a video about it. I would bet if I was a gambler, I would bet some serious dollars on it. And that is, you're going to see the definition of a credit investor be expanded to include being able to take some kind of a test or exam in order to show your level of sophistication. So no longer will it be simply net worth and income. You are now, I believe, actually, I believe you'll be going to be able to take a test. And I'm not just, when I say I believe, it's hilarious how this thing works. So there's actually a rule, not a proposed rule, an actual rule, which in the SEC world, it means like a law. So there's already a law or a rule that the SEC passed prior to Trump leaving office the last time. So this was passed in 2020. And it basically said you can become an accredited investor now by taking an exam. The SEC is going to certify some companies and some not financial, but some educational institutions to provide a course and then to issue an exam. And then if you pass the exam, boom, it's like you have a license. And now I'm a licensed accredited investor because I studied for an exam. I passed. I showed that I understand this stuff. Like I'm not an idiot. Because how many of us know people who just have more money than everybody combined in the room, and they're the dumbest people in the world, right? So level of money doesn't equate to level of sophistication by any means. And so this debate's been going on for decades. And so there's a rule in place right now on the books that allows you to go to one of these educational facilities, take a course, pass an exam, and become accredited. Here's the problem. The SEC hasn't granted anybody permission to issue those licenses. So even though it's on the books, there's nobody who's authorized to give the test or to do the course, right? So it's probably going to end up being institutions like, I don't know if those of you have studied for some professional exams, whether it's medical or legal. There's something called Kaplan, is a very well-known educational company that helps you prepare for these exams. Or even if you're trying to be a securities guy and you want a Series 7 or you want to get one of these series and become a broker, you can go to Kaplan, and there's a bunch of others. I forget the names of them, but they are all just private companies that provide you study materials and then prepare you for the test. The test is usually administered by someone else, but we just need that. So the rule's already in the book. So I believe pretty quickly, my prediction is in the first 12 months of the commissioner being the commissioner, that you will see that rule implemented. So there will be an outlet for you to go become an accredited investor if you're not and you want to be one. So that's the biggest change that's happened. Now, there might be, and I don't know if it'll happen in this administration, because again, they're trying to make it easier to raise money. But on the flip side of that, there's also been some discussion, and the SEC has come out with some reporting on this. I think based on the YouTube videos that I put out, because it was very similar to what I've been saying for a couple of years now. But there's also been a lot of talk about increasing the limit for the accredited investor definition. So right now it's $1 million, right, of net worth, excluding your primary residence. There's rumors and rumblings that it's going to go higher. There was a rumor that it was going to be 10x that, and then it turned out that was a kind of a false, misprinting. But I was saying, I think it might go up to like 3 million was like my number. And the reason I came up with 3 million is that the accredited investor definition of $1 million is back from 1982. So 42 years ago or something. And if you just adjust for inflation, $1 million back in 1982 is about 2.8, 2.9 million today. So 3 million today is about the same as a million. If you look at how many households were accredited back in 1982, it's like, I don't know, 6%, and now it's up to like 30 or whatever. And so getting that number higher will kind of bring us back to things. So I think that might happen at some point. The SEC came out with a report a couple years ago, well, about 14 months ago in December, that basically said that same thing. They brought up the inflation numbers, and like today is 3 million, so that they're looking at that. They're also looking at potentially removing your IRA money as a number you can count. So they excluded primary residence, so all the equity in your primary residence doesn't count. Now they're talking about maybe taking away IRA money to count towards that $1 million. Again, making it a little bit harder. And then they also talked about, which I thought was interesting, but made a ton of sense to me, of more regional numbers, right? Because $1 million in California is different from $1 million in Oklahoma or Alabama or some rural area, right? So maybe, in California it's 3 million, but in somewhere else it might be 1.5 million or something. So they're talking about geographical things. But either way, the first one for sure is gonna happen. And if you're not an accredited investor, or you're a sponsor that only accepts accredited, it's a good way for you to get the word out to investors that want to invest in your deal that aren't eligible right now. You can go out there once this becomes official, and you can say, hey, why don't you go, if you want to, go study for this test. It's not going to be a Mickey Mouse test. You're going to have to study for maybe a couple weeks or whatever, maybe take a course. But then you take this exam, you get your license, and now you're an accredited investor, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah,
So that's, I think, the biggest immediate update. And then I think it's not so much for past investors, but Joe, we've talked about it too. I think this wasn't a final rule, but it was a proposed rule that was on the book. So I think the proposal will come back on. But right now, you cannot pay for referrals, right? If somebody refers you an investor, you can't pay them a referral fee. Or if somebody says, hey, I can bring in a bunch of money, cut me into the deal, give me some money, you can't do that. You need a broker's license. There's a rule now that would allow that to happen. I think that eventually will pass, probably before the end of this administration. I don't think it'll be really quick, but before the end of this administration, I believe there'll be a little bit of a middle ground there where you will be able to pay commissions to people that bring in capital. There's going to be requirements, right? It's only going to be accredited investors coming over. They won't be able to advertise for that. They basically will already have to know that. So it's going to be great for people like me, or for CPAs or financial advisors, because then I could be like, oh, you're looking for a deal, let me refer you to Joe. And I say, hey, Joe, I got a ton of referrals coming your way. Let's negotiate a cut. And we have to disclose that, obviously. That's a big deal. So if I'm going to get paid 5% of whatever the referral invests, then that needs to be disclosed to the investor, because obviously that factors into it. So I think that's happening for sure. The other prediction I had has already come true. My prediction was that the Corporate Transparency Act was going to hit the bricks, and it did. I thought for different reasons. I thought the Corporate Transparency Act would fail in the court systems, and then the administration would just not appeal it. They'd be like, the judge ruled against us, and we're just not going to appeal it, and therefore it would die. I didn't realize that they were going to go, at the source and basically say, look, we're just not going to enforce it, period. So no matter what the courts say, we're just not going to enforce it. And that's what's happened. The Treasury Department came out last month and said, we're not going to enforce the Corporate Transparency Act. And then, so no more, after like 2 years of back and forth and all this nonsense. And a lot of people spent a lot of money, a lot of time filing those, because they're A students and didn't want to wait till the last minute. And then those that procrastinated and waited, and, then they got paid off this time. And for those of you who didn't know, the Corporate Transparency Act, which was this huge compliance nightmare of people having to disclose personal information, the owners and beneficial owners and controllers of entities. So if you had an LLC, any LLC, you had to provide the government with some specific information. That filing requirement has all gone away.
Mauricio, curious to get your thoughts on where you think there might be some opportunities for investments over the next year or two. Basically, I'm asking you, what are you personally doing, with your own money? I mean,
Yeah,
given the fact that the market's been so volatile, some of the real estate syndication haven't done well, just a lot
yeah.
of a lot of angst out there.
Yeah. So my expertise is in the multifamily space. The vast majority of my clients are in multifamily. That's the asset class I know the best. I'm actually holding off right now. I'm not doing much. We're at the end of the cycle for multifamily, but the issue with multifamily right now, it's down from peak to trough, primarily based on the interest rates, probably, it depends on the market, but anywhere from 25 to 30%. Most of that happened early, like in the first couple months, it just went down 20, 30%. And then for the last 18 months or almost 2 years now, it's just been, steadying. But the challenge is it's the lenders. There's still a lot of bad loans that are sitting on the books of these banks and these properties, and they just haven't been cleared. Usually, we talked about these bridge loans, right? So these bridge loans come to their end in 3 years. So all the deals that got bought in 2021, for example, that have 3-year debt on it means in 2024, which is last year, they should have come due. They will not be able to refinance because the property's gone down in value. Their interest rate now is 9%. They can't afford that. They can't make the payments. They would have to go into foreclosure or fire sell or just get rid of the property so a new owner can come in and buy it either at a deep discount or the bank takes it back and writes off the note, and it clears the system, right? But what lenders have been doing, unlike they did in 2008 with residential, is that they've just been kicking the can down the road. They've been extending. There's this saying called extend and pretend, or extend and pretend, just hoping that maybe next year interest rates will come down and we can fix problems or whatever. And so they've just been extending, and it's still going on. Last year we were talking about, because a lot of them were supposed to come due last year, and they did. But we talked about this slogan of, survive till 25 was kind of the slogan people were saying. So, hey, if we could just get to 2025, all these loans that got written in 2020, 2021, 2022, they'll have come and gone, and it'll be a bloodbath. It'll be a lot of discounted properties, which is, by the way, opportunity for, especially for syndicators. I mean, the syndicators are salivating. They're waiting for those deals to really get stressed. And it's just taking time. Like, they're modifying loans. They're trying to do everything possible. So now the whole thing is now persist until 26 is what I'm hearing now. And this is, look, I'm not a lender. I'm just passing along information I've heard from some of the broker friends that I have. And so they're starting to get to the point where they're still unwinding. But until those loans get cleared from the books, and when I say loans, really those properties get either foreclosed on, go back to the bank, and then they sell it, just to get their loan back. But there's going to be a haircut. And what sucks is that a lot of these investors, unfortunately, hopefully, I apologize if somebody in this call is in one of those, but like, these properties are down 20, 30%. That means the LP equity is gone. Because if you're raising 30% and then the investors put most of that money in, that's already wiped out. A lot of investors don't even know, but they're already wiped out. So the minute that gets transacted and traded, either again sold at a loss because they just have to sell for 80 cents on the dollar, that's all going to get it's going to get disproportionately wiped out on the LPs. But that needs to happen before the next cycle comes in. And then once the next cycle comes in, it's going to be very exciting because of two things. One, again, we're clearing all that stuff. We can move forward. But the other thing that's happening is on the construction side. If you look at what the builders, and in terms of permits, there was a huge ramp up in construction during COVID. The market now is flooded with all this new inventory that's been coming in, but you can look at the permits. It's not something that you need to guess. You can just look at the permits and see how many permits have been requested, because it's all the process. And there's just a huge gap here over the next 3 or 4 years where there's just going to be no new product coming on the market. And that's going to, I think, along with clearing the market, and we'll see what happens with interest rates. Interest rates are anticipated to come down. That'll fuel the next thing. And that's why today is actually a really good time to get going if you want to get going, because once this thing gets cleared, then things are starting to pencil again.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but yeah, Mauricio, I just want to personally thank you for teaching our audience a little bit more about the PPM and really focus on the pieces that are more important and how to read it properly.
Yeah.
But before we sign off today, though, I just want to give you a few more minutes and just talk about anything you want, and maybe you can share with our audience a little bit more about your mentorship program. You mentioned earlier that both Gary and I we're in your mentor program. We find tremendous value. I said it to you before that I hate missing it, and I've done some your calls with the cameras turned off because I didn't have a shirt on. So yeah, just please tell us more about that, and how to best reach you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in that, you can just go to coachingwithmauricio.com, and I'll send you some information. We'll see if it's a fit. But yeah, it's all about access, right? So my goal is for everybody to raise money compliantly. That's the ultimate goal. And the challenge people have is that they just don't know what they don't know. Like, they're out there, they're stepping on all these landmines. And so my job is to get together weekly, do a little bit of training on a particular topic, do a deep dive. But ultimately, the idea is and Joe, you're there, like you said, every week. Asking questions, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? And it's just a way to get access to me, get some content, but it's really about the implementation. So we'll review websites, we'll review business plans, we'll review social media posts, we'll do all that kind of stuff. And it's really meant to make sure that really to build confidence so you can sleep well at night. You know, you don't stay out of jail. You know, you want to make sure that you're doing it because there's so many freaking landmines that syndicators step on before they hire the attorney. It's one of the reasons I created. I was getting questions while I was at Premier Law Group, and people asked me these amazing questions. And I was like, wait a minute, you're not one of my clients. Like, why aren't you asking your attorney these great questions? Because these are really important questions. Like, if you're not quite sure whether you can do this or not. And then I realized they don't have an attorney because they're not at the point where they're under contract and they go hire an attorney. So there's all this compliance gap. I actually call it the syndicator blind spot, where people just are out there, you know, communicating, getting pre-commitments, you know, going on social media, talking to people, sending underwriting, sending business plans, and doing all this stuff. And they're just stepping on landmines left and right. And all of that is happening without the watchful eye of an attorney. So the idea was, hey, let's get together once a week, bring your questions. You're not going to be able to access another attorney who's not on your payroll to just ask them a question for 20 minutes. They just don't do that. So this is a way for you to have access to an attorney, ask all your questions, learn a ton, and then be part of the community, because a lot of folks have been telling me, which I wasn't even thinking about this, they're learning so much from everybody else's questions because everybody's in different stages. And they're also just starting to work outside of the program. They're actually having their own calls and helping each other out. So it's a great community to get some support and learn. Because I'm the expert on the legal side, but if you have a question about underwriting, I ain't your guy, but somebody in the program is. So if anybody's interested, happy to have a conversation, coachingwithmauricio.com. And if you've got any questions about anything else, and you know, maybe you're watching the replay or something, you want to reach out, just go to askmauricio.com. Just drop a question in there. Just let me know you were here on this webinar, and I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes. Well, once again, Mauricio, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you next Wednesday.
Yep, sounds like a plan. I'll be in Florida. I'll be in sunny Florida, but we'll be there, rain or shine. We do it every week, so we'll be there.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you, guys.